I saw my dead son's birthmark today. That crescent moon on his wrist that I kissed goodnight 5,000 times before he turned to ash in a fire 20 years ago. Except, he didn't burn. He's standing 10 feet away from me right now, in a black suit that costs more than my car, about to destroy the man who killed him. No, wait. The man who was supposed to kill him. The man I've been sleeping next to for 2 decades while my boy clawed his way out of hell to come back and bury us both. His name is Victor. My husband. And the stranger across from us, this cold, calculated investor who Victor thinks is here to save our drowning company, just ripped the buyout contract in half with his bare hands and said 5 words that made my heart stop. I'm here to take back what you stole. See, Victor thought he was meeting with some corporate vulture named Mr. Black, someone desperate enough to wire millions to cover the money Victor's been embezzling from my father's company. But when Mr. Black reached across the mahogany table to grab a pen, his sleeve pulled back just an inch. Just enough. And there it was. That crescent-shaped birthmark, slightly raised, the color of caramel. The one I used to trace with my finger while my baby fell asleep. The one I thought burned away with his body 20 years ago. My lips moved before my brain could catch up. Leo. And the way Victor's face drained of color, like someone pulled a plug and let all the blood run out, told me everything I needed to know. My son didn't die in that fire. Victor made sure of that. He needed Leo gone, not dead. Dead children get autopsies. Missing children just disappear. The room is spinning now, and I don't know if it's the Xanax Victor dissolved in my morning coffee or the fact that my entire reality just shattered like glass. Victor's stammering something about ashes and closed caskets and cremation, but Leo, my baby, my boy, this stranger with my son's birthmark, just stands there with a smile that could cut diamonds. You didn't bury me, Dad, he says, and that word, Dad, drips with 20 years of venom. You buried an empty box while I was screaming in a basement 300 miles away. But here's the thing about orphanages that take cash under the table. He pauses, buttoning his jacket with movements so deliberate they feel rehearsed. They keep records, very detailed records, and the director you paid off, she's been waiting 20 years to tell the police exactly what you did. That's when I see them. 2 officers standing in the hallway, waiting like vultures on a wire. Victor sees them too. And the sound he makes isn't quite human. It's the sound of a man watching his entire empire collapse in real time. Leo walks toward the door, his expensive shoes clicking against marble. And just before he reaches the threshold, he turns back. His eyes lock onto Victor's, and his smile grows wider, crueler. Oh, and Dad, that grave you made Mom visit every Sunday for 20 years. The one with my name on it. He tilts his head, and in the fluorescent light, I can see that birthmark again, that impossible proof that nightmares can come back to life. The forensics team finished digging this morning. Want to guess what they found 6 feet under my headstone? Or should I let the police tell you? I need to take you back 20 years, to the day my father died and everything started to rot from the inside out. Dad, Richard Vance, built Vance Corp from nothing. Literally nothing. He started in a garage in 1965, building circuit boards by hand, and by the time I was born, he had 3 factories and contracts with half the tech companies in Silicon Valley. He was old school, you know. Believed in loyalty, in family, in leaving something behind that mattered. So when the cancer took him in 2003, everyone expected him to leave the company to Victor. After all, Victor was his son-in-law, had an MBA from Cornell, wore the right suits, said the right things at board meetings, but Dad didn't trust him. Never did. I remember the lawyer reading the will in our living room, and the way Victor's jaw clenched when he heard the words, I leave controlling interest in Vance Corporation to my grandson, Leo Richard Vance, to be held in trust until his 25th birthday. Leo was 5 years old. He was sitting on the floor playing with Hot Wheels, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just inherited $40 million and his father's entire future. Victor smiled. God, I remember that smile. Thin-lipped, practiced, the kind you give when your face doesn't match what's happening in your head. That's wonderful, he said, his hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. Richard knew Leo would carry on the legacy. But that night, after Leo was asleep, I heard Victor on the phone in his study. The door was cracked, and his voice was low, urgent. 20 years is too long to wait. I'm not running this company as a goddamn babysitter for a trust fund. I should have known then, should have packed a bag, grabbed my son, and run. But I was grieving, exhausted, and stupid enough to believe that loving someone meant trusting them. 3 weeks later, Victor suggested a family trip to our cabin in Lake Tahoe, said we all needed to heal together, away from the lawyers and the press and the vultures circling Dad's estate. The cabin was remote, 2 hours from the nearest town, surrounded by pine trees and silence. Victor said it would be good for Leo, good for us, but he was different up there. Distracted. He kept checking his phone, disappearing for hours to take business calls, coming back smelling like gasoline and sweat. On the third night, he told me he needed to drive into town for supplies, asked me to take one of my sleeping pills, said I'd been looking tired, that I needed rest. I should have said no, should have asked why he was so insistent, but I swallowed that little white pill with a glass of water, kissed Leo goodnight, and crawled into bed. The last thing I remember is Victor standing in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light, watching me like I was already a ghost. When I woke up, the cabin was on fire. Smoke so thick I couldn't see my own hands. I was screaming Leo's name, crawling through flames, and then Victor was there, dragging me out, holding me back while I fought him like a wild animal. "He's gone!" Victor kept shouting. "He's gone! Helena!" The whole east wing collapsed. But here's what I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until 20 years later. Leo wasn't in that cabin when it burned. Victor had already taken him. Victor drugged my son with children's Benadryl, stuffed him in the trunk of a rental car, and drove 6 hours south to Bakersfield. There was a place there, an unlicensed group home run by a woman named Margaret Hess, who asked no questions if the price was right. Victor paid her $20,000 in cash to take a foundling. That's what he called my baby, a foundling. He told her Leo had no family, no records, no past, just another unwanted kid that nobody would miss. Then he drove back to Tahoe, set fire to the cabin using accelerant he'd bought 3 towns over, and called 911 screaming that his son was trapped inside. The fire marshal ruled it accidental, faulty wiring in a 50-year-old structure. They found remains in what used to be Leo's bedroom, bone fragments, ash, enough for a closed casket, enough to stop questions. Victor organized the funeral within 48 hours, before anyone could demand an autopsy. And I was so shattered, so hollowed out by grief, that I didn't fight him. I signed whatever papers he put in front of me. I took whatever pills he handed me. I let him take control of the trust, of the company, of my entire life. Because what else was there? My father was dead. My son was dead. I was just haunted furniture in Victor's newly renovated empire. What Victor didn't count on, what he couldn't have predicted in his perfectly calculated plan, was that Leo would remember. 5-year-olds aren't supposed to retain trauma like that, right? They're supposed to forget, to adapt, to have those memories blur into bad dreams that fade over time. But Leo didn't forget. He told me later, much later, that he remembered everything. The taste of cherry Benadryl on his tongue, the sound of the trunk closing above his head, the smell of gasoline on his father's hands when Victor pulled him out and handed him to a stranger. And most of all, he remembered my face, the way I used to braid his hair before bed, the songs I sang, the birthmark I kissed. He held onto those memories like a drowning man holds onto driftwood, because they were the only proof he had that he'd been loved once, that he'd been real. Margaret Hess's group home was hell with a doormat. 12 kids crammed into a house meant for 6, sleeping on mattresses that smelled like mold and old urine. Margaret collected checks from the state for each child, fake documents, forged birth certificates, the whole operation running on bribes and blind eyes. She fed them once a day, usually oatmeal or beans, whatever was cheapest at the discount grocery store. And if you cried, if you asked for your parents, she had a closet for that. Dark, cramped, with a lock on the outside. Leo spent his 6th birthday in that closet, because he wouldn't stop asking when his mommy was coming to get him. He learned to stop asking after that. He learned to survive. When he turned 7, a social worker finally noticed something was off and raided the place. Margaret disappeared overnight, probably spending Victor's cash on a beach somewhere, and the kids got scattered into the official foster system. Leo bounced around for years, 8 homes in 6 years. Some families were okay, some were not. One foster father made him sleep in the garage during winter. Another family used the state checks for meth and forgot to feed him for days at a time. But here's the thing about trauma. It either breaks you or it forges you into something unbreakable. And Leo? My son became steel. By the time he was 13, he was already different from the other kids in the system. He devoured books like they were oxygen, taught himself algebra from a library textbook, memorized every article he could find about business, about money, about power. The other kids thought he was weird, obsessed. They didn't understand that he was building armor, that every fact he learned, every skill he mastered, was a weapon he was sharpening for a war that was still years away. At 15, he ran away from his last foster home, some religious family in Fresno who wanted him to pray the anger away. He hitchhiked to San Francisco with $40 and a duffel bag full of stolen library books. He slept in shelters, did odd jobs, saved every penny until he had enough to buy a fake ID that said he was 18. Then Leo did something crazy, something brilliant. He found a startup called Nextech that was about to go under. 2 MIT dropouts with a revolutionary encryption algorithm, but zero business sense. Leo walked into their crumbling office, looked at their code, and spent 3 hours explaining exactly how they could monetize it. They hired him on the spot, paid him in equity because they couldn't afford salary. And when Nextech got acquired by Google 18 months later for $60 million, Leo walked away with $4 million after taxes. He was 17 years old. He changed his name legally, Leo Black, because he wanted to bury Leo Vance until he was ready to resurrect him, and he started building his empire. Tech investments, real estate, venture capital. He was ruthless, calculating, the kind of guy who could smell weakness across a boardroom. By 23, he was worth $40 million. The exact amount his grandfather had left him, the exact amount Victor had stolen. And the whole time, through every deal, every success, every million added to his net worth, he never forgot the man who put him in that trunk. He was just waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, 6 months ago, he hired a private investigator named Morrison, who specialized in cold cases. Leo gave him one task. Find out what really happened to Helena Vance. Find out if my mother knew. Morrison came back with a file 3 inches thick and a look on his face like he'd seen something that made him want to take a long shower. Your mother didn't know, he said, sliding the folder across the table at some anonymous coffee shop in Oakland. She's been medicated into oblivion for 2 decades. Xanax, Valium, sometimes both. Your father's been controlling her prescriptions through a private physician who asks no questions. Leo opened the file, and I can only imagine what went through his head when he saw the photos. Me, shuffling through the mansion like a ghost in expensive clothes. Me, staring at nothing during charity galas while Victor's hand stayed locked on my elbow. Me visiting that fake grave every Sunday, leaving flowers for a son who was alive and building an empire 300 miles away. Morrison had surveillance footage, medical records that he'd obtained through methods I probably don't want to know about, and bank statements showing Victor's embezzlement. $53 million, siphoned over 20 years through shell companies and offshore accounts. Victor had been so busy stealing that he'd gotten sloppy, left digital trails everywhere. But here's the beautiful part. The part that still makes me smile when I think about it. Leo didn't just want revenge. He wanted theater. He wanted Victor to feel every second of the fall. So he started buying up Vance Corp's debt, quietly, through holding companies with names like Crescent Holdings and Vanguard Solutions, little inside jokes that Victor would never get. Every time Victor borrowed to cover his tracks, Leo was the silent creditor on the other end, tightening the noose. He manipulated stock prices, triggered supplier issues, even started rumors about federal investigations that sent our investors running. Within 4 months, Vance Corp was hemorrhaging money. Victor was desperate, panicking, staying up until 3 a.m., trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. And that's when Leo made his move. He had a proxy reach out to Victor, Some slick consultant who said he knew an angel investor who specialized in saving failing companies. Someone with deep pockets and no emotional attachment to the Vance name. Someone named Mr. Black. Victor jumped at it like a starving dog at a steak. He didn't even do proper due diligence. Didn't question why this mysterious billionaire wanted to save some mid-tier tech company in San Jose. He was too desperate, too afraid of losing everything he'd killed for. The first meeting was set at a restaurant downtown, neutral ground. Leo walked in wearing a Tom Ford suit and sunglasses, his hair styled differently, his entire demeanor calibrated to be forgettable. And Victor didn't recognize his own son. Why would he? The last time he saw Leo, the kid was 5 years old with a gap-toothed smile and scraped knees. The man across from him was 25 or 6'2", with a handshake that could crush bone and eyes that gave nothing away. They talked numbers. Leo offered to inject $20 million in exchange for 70% equity. Victor tried to negotiate. Of course he did. But Leo played it perfectly. Cold, detached. Like he had a dozen other companies lined up if this one didn't work out. By the end of dinner, Victor was practically begging. The second meeting was where Leo really started twisting the knife. He suggested doing the next discussion at the Vance mansion. "I like to see how executives live," he said smoothly. "Tells me about their priorities." Victor agreed immediately, probably thought showing off the house would prove he was worth investing in. So 3 days later, Leo walked through the front door of his childhood home for the first time in 20 years. I was there. Victor had told me to look presentable for the investor, had handed me my pills that morning with a glass of orange juice and a warning to smile and nod but don't talk business. I was wearing a cream-colored dress that Victor had picked out, sitting on the couch like an ornament, my brain wrapped in pharmaceutical cotton. And then Mr. Black walked in. I didn't know him. Didn't recognize the sharp jawline or the way he carried himself like he owned every room he entered. But when he shook Victor's hand, I saw something flicker in his eyes, something dark and hungry. He looked around the house, at the photos on the mantle that no longer included Leo, at the empty space where my son's baby grand piano used to sit, at me sitting there like a drugged doll in my own living room. "Beautiful home," Leo said, his voice perfectly neutral. "Very clean, like nothing bad ever happened here." Victor laughed, totally missing the edge in those words. "We've worked hard to maintain it," he said, guiding Leo toward the dining room. I followed because that's what I did. Followed Victor's instructions like a well-trained pet. Dinner was catered. Victor had hired some fancy chef because he couldn't risk me cooking and embarrassing him. I sat at one end of the long table, Victor and Leo at the other, and I watched them talk. Business jargon, projections, market analysis. But I couldn't stop staring at Mr. Black. Something about him felt familiar. Not his face, not his voice, but the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. The way his left hand drummed against the table in a rhythm I'd heard before. At one point, our eyes met across the table, and for just a second, I saw something in his expression crack. Pain. Raw, bleeding pain. And then it was gone, replaced by that corporate mask. When dinner ended, Leo did something strange. He asked to use the restroom, and Victor pointed him upstairs. Second door on the left. But Leo didn't go to the bathroom. I know because I followed him. Don't ask me why. The pills were wearing off early that night, and some part of my buried maternal instinct was screaming that something was wrong. I found him standing in front of a closed door at the end of the hallway, Leo's old room, the one Victor had turned into a home gym years ago, erasing every trace of our son like he'd never existed. Mr. Black's hand was on the doorknob, his shoulders rigid, and I heard him take a breath that sounded like it hurt. "That was my son's room," I said quietly, and I don't know what made me say it. Maybe the pills were losing their grip. Maybe I was just tired of pretending. He turned around fast, and in the dim hallway light, I saw his face properly for the first time. Really saw it. The shape of his nose. The way his eyebrows drew together. My son's face, aged 20 years, sharpened by survival. "I know," he said. Just 2 words. And then he walked past me, back down the stairs, and told Victor he'd be in touch about the investment. He left me standing there in that hallway, my heart pounding for the first time in 2 decades, wondering if I was finally losing my mind, or if I'd just found it. I couldn't sleep that night, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything except replay that moment in the hallway over and over until I thought I'd scratch through my own skull trying to make sense of it. "I know," he'd said. "I know." Like it wasn't just polite conversation. Like those 2 words carried 20 years of weight. Victor noticed, of course. He always noticed when I started acting off. The next morning, he doubled my dosage, 2 pills instead of 1, dissolved in my coffee while he hummed some cheerful tune like he wasn't drugging his wife into submission. "You seemed anxious yesterday," he said, kissing my forehead like a concerned husband. "I need you calm for the next few weeks. Mr. Black is our lifeline, and I can't have you." Fragmenting. That's what he called it when the real me started clawing through the chemical fog. When I asked questions or showed emotion or did anything that reminded him I used to be a whole person. But here's the thing about survival. You learn to play dead until you're ready to bite. So I took the coffee, smiled, told Victor I was fine, just tired. And then I poured the whole thing down the sink the second he left for the office. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn on the faucet, because I knew what I was doing. I was choosing to wake up. And waking up after 20 years of forced sleep is like being born again. Painful, terrifying, and absolutely necessary. Within hours, the fog started lifting. My thoughts sharpened. Colors looked brighter. And the rage, oh God, the rage that I'd been too medicated to feel, came flooding back like a tsunami. I spent that entire day thinking about Mr. Black, about the way he'd stood outside Leo's room, about those 2 words, "I know." And then I remembered something small but impossible to ignore. During dinner, when Mr. Black had reached for his water glass, his sleeve had pulled back slightly. I'd seen something on his wrist. At the time, my brain was too foggy to process it, but now, with the chemicals wearing off, the memory crystallized into perfect clarity. A birthmark, crescent-shaped. The exact same mark that my Leo had. The exact same mark I used to kiss before bedtime. The odds of that being coincidence. Astronomical. Impossible. Unless... My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might pass out right there in my empty mansion. I needed proof. Something concrete. Something that would tell me I wasn't losing my mind or inventing hope where there was none. And that's when I remembered Maria, our housekeeper. She'd been with us for 12 years, and unlike everyone else in Victor's orbit, she actually saw me, really saw me. She'd slip me concerned looks when Victor wasn't watching, had once asked quietly if I was okay when she found me crying in the bathroom. If anyone would help me, it would be Maria. I found her folding laundry in the utility room, and when I walked in, she looked startled, probably because I rarely left my designated spaces in the house unless Victor told me to. "Maria," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I need your help with something, and I need you to not tell Victor." She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, deciding if this was the kind of risk that would cost her the job. But then she nodded. "What do you need, Mrs. Vance?" I told her about Mr. Black's visit, about the coffee cup he'd used during dinner. "Victor had everything thrown away already," I said, "but the dishwasher hasn't been run yet. If his cup is still in there." Maria understood immediately. She retrieved the cup, a simple glass tumbler with a perfect thumbprint still visible on the side, and wrapped it in a kitchen towel like it was made of diamonds. "And there's a private lab in Palo Alto," I told her, my words coming faster now. "DNA testing. I need you to take this there, today. I'll give you cash." Maria's eyes went wide. "DNA? Mrs. Vance, what?" "Please," I interrupted, and my voice cracked on that word. "Please, Maria. I can't explain yet. But if I'm right..." I couldn't finish that sentence. Couldn't say the words out loud because saying them would make it real, and if I was wrong, the disappointment might actually kill me. Maria took the cup. I gave her $3,000 in cash from a hidden safe that Victor didn't know I still had access to, money my father had left me in a separate account, forgotten in the chaos after his death. The lab was expensive, but they were discreet and fast. 72 hours, they promised. 3 days to find out if I was insane or if my son had come back from the dead. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I had to keep pretending to take the pills, keep playing the medicated housewife, while inside I was screaming. I'd pour the morning coffee down the sink, then stumble around like I was drugged anyway, just in case Victor was watching. At night, when he was asleep, I'd lie awake counting ceiling tiles and imagining what it would mean if the test came back positive. Would Leo forgive me for not fighting harder? For believing Victor's lies? For visiting a fake grave instead of searching for the truth? On the third day, Maria came to my room with an envelope. Her hands were shaking when she gave it to me, and her eyes were wet. "I looked," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself. Mrs. Vance?" She didn't finish. Just squeezed my hand and left me alone with the envelope that contained either salvation or the final proof of my madness. I sat on the edge of my bed for 10 minutes before I could open it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The paper inside was clinical, cold, full of numbers and terminology I barely understood. But there, highlighted in yellow by Maria, were the only words that mattered. Probability of biological relationship, 99.9%. My son, my baby, my Leo was alive. The sound that came out of me wasn't quite human, somewhere between a sob and a scream, muffled by my hand because I couldn't let Victor hear. 20 years of grief, of visiting a lie, of letting my husband drug me into oblivion while my son was out there somewhere, surviving, growing, becoming. And now he was back, not to reunite, not to forgive. He was back to destroy the man who destroyed us both. I stopped taking the pills completely after that, cold turkey, which was probably dangerous, but I didn't care. I needed to be sharp, awake, ready. The withdrawal was brutal, shaking hands, nausea, headaches that felt like someone was driving nails through my skull. But pain meant I was alive. Pain meant I was feeling again. And God, I had 20 years of feeling to catch up on. I started watching Victor differently now, studying him. Before, he'd been this blurry figure moving through my medicated haze, someone who told me what to wear, what to eat, where to sit. But now I saw him clearly for the first time in 2 decades. The way he'd check my coffee cup to make sure I'd drunk it all. The way he'd schedule my doctor's appointments without asking, coming home with new prescriptions I'd never requested. The way he'd steer me away from conversations at parties, his hand tight on my elbow, whispering, "You're getting too excited, darling. Time for your medicine." He'd been keeping me prisoner in my own body, and I'd let him. But I was awake now. And awake, I was dangerous. I started pretending to take the pills, holding them under my tongue, spitting them out when Victor left the room. I'd stumble and slur my words just enough to keep him convinced. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd watch him through barely closed eyes as he sat in bed scrolling through his phone, and I wondered how many other secrets he was hiding, how many other lives he'd destroyed to protect his lie. 3 days after I got the DNA results, Victor came home in a panic, actually sweating through his shirt, which I'd never seen before. "The banks are asking questions," he said, pacing our bedroom like a caged animal. "Someone's been digging into the company finances. I don't know who, but they're looking at transactions from years ago, from when..." He didn't finish that sentence, but he didn't need to. From when he'd stolen Leo's inheritance. From when he'd become CEO of a company that was never supposed to be his. That's when I realized what Leo was doing. He wasn't just here to reveal himself. He was here to dismantle Victor piece by piece, to make him paranoid, desperate, trapped. And it was working. Victor started drinking more, scotch at breakfast, wine with lunch. He'd snap at me over nothing, then apologize with expensive jewelry I never wore. He aged 5 years and 2 weeks. And then came the thing I'd been dreading. Victor walked into the bathroom one morning while I was brushing my teeth and said, with that calm, clinical tone he used when he'd already made a decision, "I think you need more intensive care, Helena." Dr. Morrison suggested a facility in Arizona, very private, very discreet, just for a few months, until you're stabilized. A facility. He was going to lock me away, drug me back into oblivion where I couldn't ask questions or remember or interfere. I kept brushing my teeth, kept my face blank, even though inside I was screaming. "Whatever you think is best," I said through a mouthful of toothpaste, but my mind was racing. I had maybe 48 hours before Victor made good on that threat. I needed to find Leo, needed to warn him, needed to... God, I didn't even know. I just knew I couldn't let Victor erase me again. That afternoon, while Victor was at the office, I did something I hadn't done in years. I left the house alone. No driver, no escort, no Victor tracking my every move. I called an Uber from Maria's phone and had them drop me at a coffee shop 3 miles away. Then I used the shop's Wi-Fi to search for Mr. Black, Leo Black. I found his company website, Black Ventures, minimalist design, a photo of him looking every bit the ruthless investor Victor thought he was, but there was a contact form. I stared at it for 10 minutes before typing. "I know who you are. I have proof. Victor is planning something. We need to meet. Please. Mom." I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then deleted the browser history and went home, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack a rib. Victor was already there when I walked in, standing in the foyer with his arms crossed. "Where were you?" His voice was too calm. Dangerous calm. "I went for a walk," I said, keeping my voice dreamy, disconnected. "Just around the neighborhood. I needed air." He studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide if I was lying. "You seem different," he said finally. "More alert. Have you been taking your medication?" "Every morning," I lied. "With breakfast, like always." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, suspicion blooming like mold. But before he could push further, his phone rang. He answered it, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, then anger, then something that looked almost like fear. "What do you mean? My presence is requested," he said into the phone. "By who?" A pause. "Mr. Black? Why would he..." Another pause, longer this time. When Victor hung up, his hands were shaking. "Mr. Black wants to meet tonight," he said, more to himself than to me. "At the family cemetery, he said it's about finalizing the inheritance transfer." The family cemetery, where we'd buried Leo's empty coffin 20 years ago, where Victor had made me stand in the rain while they lowered that lie into the ground. My breath caught, and I had to turn away before Victor could see my face. Leo was making his move, and he wanted Victor exactly where the nightmare began. Victor tried to convince me to stay home. "It's just business. You'd be bored." But I insisted. Actually insisted, which was so out of character that he looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "I want to pay respects to Leo," I said softly, and I let my voice crack on our son's name. "It's been weeks since I've visited. I feel like I'm forgetting him." That got him. Victor's face softened into something that might have looked like sympathy if you didn't know it was really just relief that I was still playing my role. "Of course," he said. "Of course, darling. We'll go together." So that night, as the sun set over San Jose and painted the sky the color of a healing bruise, we drove to the cemetery where my son's name was carved into granite above an empty hole. And I knew, with the kind of certainty that lives in your bones, that whatever happened next would either save me or destroy me. There was no middle ground anymore. The cemetery was empty when we arrived, just rows of headstones glowing pale in the dying light, and that awful silence that only exists in places where people bury their grief. Victor parked near the entrance, and I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. His jaw was clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. "This is bizarre," he muttered, checking his watch for the 3rd time. "Who conducts business in a cemetery?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer, because I'd just seen him, Leo, standing about 50 yards away, near the back corner where the Vance family plot was. He was wearing all black, hands in his pockets, perfectly still, like he'd been carved from the same stone as the graves around him. Victor saw him too and started walking, his expensive shoes crunching on gravel. I followed a few steps behind, my heart beating so loud I was sure they could both hear it. "Mr. Black," Victor called out, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "This is certainly unconventional." Leo didn't respond. He just stood there, staring down at a headstone. As we got closer, I realized which one: Leo Richard Vance, beloved son, 1998-2003. The lie that had defined my entire life, carved in granite. "I like to do business in quiet places," Leo said finally, his voice flat, emotionless. "Places where the truth can't hide." He turned to face us, and in the fading light, his face looked harder, older. "Tell me, Victor, do you come here often? Do you visit your son's grave?" Victor laughed, that fake, nervous sound he made when he didn't understand what was happening. "Well, Helena visits every Sunday. I come when I can, but business keeps me—" "Business," Leo interrupted, and the word sounded like an accusation. "Right. The business you stole from a 5-year-old boy. The business you committed murder to obtain." The air changed, went cold. Victor's smile disappeared. "I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything," Leo said, pulling something from his pocket, a folding shovel, the kind hikers carry. "I'm stating facts, and I think it's time we verify those facts. So here's what's going to happen, Victor. You're going to dig." Victor stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Dig? Have you completely— This is insane! I'm leaving!" He turned to go, but Leo's voice stopped him cold. "The police are on their way. They have a warrant to exhume this grave based on evidence I submitted 3 weeks ago. You can either start digging now and maybe convince me to call them off, or you can wait for them to arrive with cameras and reporters and a forensics team that will dig anyway." Victor's face went from red to white in seconds. His eyes darted between Leo and the grave, and I could actually see his brain working, calculating odds, searching for an exit. "There's nothing down there," he said, but his voice was shaking. "My son is buried there. This is desecration." "Your son?" Leo's smile was terrible, cruel. "Funny, because I hired a ground-penetrating radar team last month, and according to their scans, that casket you buried is empty. So tell me, Victor, if your son burned to death in a fire, where exactly are his remains?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own pulse. Victor's hands were clenching and unclenching at his sides, and I watched 20 years of lies trying to hold themselves together behind his eyes. "I don't have to explain anything to you," he said finally. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but—" "It's not a game," Leo said quietly, dangerously. "It's an excavation of truth. So pick up the shovel, Victor. Or I make a phone call and this becomes tomorrow's headline. Tech CEO investigated for murder of 5-year-old heir." Victor looked at me then, probably expecting me to defend him, to call this crazy, to be the medicated wife who agreed with everything he said. But I just stared back at him with clear eyes for the first time in 20 years. And I said nothing. I watched him break. Watched the exact moment he decided that digging was better than headlines, that privacy was worth the humiliation. He grabbed the shovel from Leo's hand and walked to the grave like a man walking to his execution. The first shovel of dirt hit the pile with a sound like a drum beat. Then another, and another. Victor was sweating now, his shirt sticking to his back, and every time he looked up, Leo was just standing there, watching, waiting. It took 20 minutes to reach the casket, small, white, exactly as I remembered from the funeral I could barely stand through. Victor's hands were bleeding from the shovel, and he was breathing hard. "Satisfied?" He spat at Leo. "There. You see? It's there. Just like I said." "Open it," Leo said. Just 2 words. But they landed like a death sentence. Victor's face did something I'd never seen before. It crumpled, like his bones couldn't hold his skin anymore. "Or I can't," he whispered. "I won't. This is sick." "Open it," Leo repeated, his voice harder now. "Or I will." And that's when Victor snapped. 20 years of secrets. 20 years of paranoia. 20 years of knowing that one day the truth would claw its way out of the ground. It all came pouring out of him like poison from a wound. "There's nothing in there," Victor screamed, and his voice echoed off the headstones. "There was never anything in there. I couldn't bury him because he wasn't dead. I sent him away. I had to. That little brat inherited everything. Everything your grandfather built. Everything I worked for. And I was supposed to just wait 20 years like some kind of babysitter. I saved this company. I made it what it is. And that child was going to take it all just because he had the right last name." He was crying now, tears and snot running down his face, and he didn't even seem to notice. "So yes, I set the fire. Yes, I drugged him and drove him to that godforsaken group home in Bakersfield. I paid that woman $20,000 to lose his paperwork, to make sure no one would ever connect him back to us. And it worked. For 20 years, it worked." He turned to me, his eyes wild. "I did it for us, Helena. For our future. You were nothing before me, just Richard's depressed daughter with no prospects. I gave you a life. I gave you purpose. All I asked was that you take your pills and stop asking questions." The cemetery was spinning. Or maybe I was spinning. Victor's words were bouncing around in my skull like bullets, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, because hearing him confess was somehow worse than knowing. It made it real, made it unforgivable. But Leo, my son, my baby, just stood there with his phone in his hand, recording every single word. "Thank you, Victor," Leo said softly. "That's all I needed." And that's when Victor saw it. Saw the phone, saw the red recording dot, saw his entire life ending in real time. "No," he breathed. "No, you can't." But Leo was already texting someone, probably his lawyer, probably the police, probably everyone who needed to hear a father confess to destroying his own son. Victor lunged for the phone, but Leo sidestepped easily, and suddenly I was moving. I was stepping between them, and my voice, my real voice, the one that had been buried under chemicals and grief for 2 decades, came out strong and clear. "Don't you dare touch him." Victor froze, stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Helena?" "I stopped taking the pills 3 weeks ago," I said, and every word felt like freedom. "I know everything. The DNA test, the fake death certificate, the offshore accounts where you hid his inheritance. I know what you did, Victor. And I've been waiting for this moment since the second I found out." I pulled my own phone from my pocket. Maria had bought me a new one, untraceable, just for this. "I've been recording too. Every conversation, every threat, every time you tried to drug me or lock me away. It's all documented, it's all time-stamped, and it's all already in the hands of my lawyer." Victor's face went through every emotion at once: shock, rage, betrayal, fear, before landing on something I'd never seen before: defeat. His knees buckled, and he sat down hard on the pile of dirt next to the open grave, his head in his bleeding hands. "You don't understand," he sobbed. "I had no choice. The company was failing. Your father left me nothing. Nothing. I built it back up. I saved it." "By murdering your son," Leo said, and his voice was ice. "By imprisoning your wife. By stealing from a child and burying the evidence in an empty coffin." He crouched down to Victor's level, and for the first time, I saw my son's face soften, not with forgiveness, with pity. "The police will be here in 5 minutes. I'd suggest you use that time to pray that hell has better accommodations than prison." The police arrived exactly when Leo said they would. 5 minutes. Sirens cutting through the cemetery, silence like knives. 4 squad cars, lights painting the headstones red and blue, and Detective Sarah Chen leading the pack with a warrant already in her hand. Victor actually tried to run, stumbling over graves and dirt piles like a drunk man in the dark. 2 officers had him on the ground in seconds, his face pressed into the grass next to our son's empty grave. There was poetry in that, I thought, justice serving itself on the exact spot where Victor's lies had been buried for 20 years. "Victor Vance," Detective Chen said, reading from a card even though she probably had it memorized. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, kidnapping, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit murder." Each charge landed like a stone. Victor was screaming something, I couldn't tell if it was denials or pleas or just incoherent rage. But nobody was listening. They pulled him up, hands cuffed behind his back, and I watched blood from his torn palms drip onto his $1,000 shoes. He looked at me one last time, and I don't know what he expected to see. Sympathy? Loyalty? The drugged, obedient wife who'd stood by him for 20 years? But I just stared back at him with the coldest expression I could manage and said 5 words I'd been saving for 2 decades. I hope you rot slowly. His face crumpled. They shoved him into the back of a squad car, and I watched the taillights disappear down the cemetery road, taking my nightmare with them. The silence that followed was different from before. Lighter, like someone had opened windows in a house that had been sealed shut for years. Detective Chen approached us, me and Leo, with a tablet in her hands. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Black, we're going to need formal statements, but first... She looked at Leo with something like awe. I've been a detective for 15 years. Never seen anything like this. You basically built an airtight case and handed it to us gift-wrapped. Leo shrugged, his hands in his pockets, that dangerous calm still radiating from him. I had 20 years to plan. It would have been embarrassing to mess it up. Detective Chen smiled, actually smiled, then turned serious again. We'll need to exhume the casket officially, document everything. The trial's going to be media chaos. Good, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. I want everyone to know what he did. I want his name destroyed the same way he destroyed ours. She nodded, made some notes on her tablet, then paused. There's something else. We executed a warrant on your home 2 hours ago. Found enough Xanax and Valium in Victor's safe to sedate a small army. Prescription pads from 3 different doctors, all forged. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands totaling $53 million. She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Vance, you're going to need medical supervision for the withdrawal. What he did to you, that's torture. Legally, that's torture. I felt Leo's hand on my shoulder then, the first time he'd touched me since he was 5 years old. His grip was firm, grounding. She'll have the best doctors, he said quietly, and lawyers, and anything else she needs. The next morning, I woke up in a private suite at Stanford Medical Center. Not because Victor had put me there, because Leo had, because my son, my alive, grown, impossibly resilient son, had hired a team of doctors to help me detox safely from 2 decades of pharmaceutical prison. There were news vans outside the hospital, reporters screaming questions about the tech CEO murder scandal and the Vance family tragedy exposed. My phone, the new one Maria had gotten me, had 247 missed calls. But I didn't care about any of that. I cared about the man sitting in the chair next to my hospital bed, typing on a laptop, looking so much like my father it made my chest ache. Leo, I said, and my voice was hoarse from crying the night before. He looked up immediately, closed the laptop. How are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck, I admitted. But also, free. Is that insane? To feel free when everything's falling apart. He smiled then, a real smile, not the predator's smile he'd worn in that boardroom. Nothing's falling apart, Mom. It's coming together. Victor's being held without bail. The DA has enough evidence to put him away for 40 years minimum. And this morning, the Vance Corp board held an emergency meeting. I sat up straighter, ignoring the IV tugging at my arm. What happened? Leo's smile grew wider, sharper. They voted unanimously to remove Victor as CEO effective immediately. And then they reviewed my grandfather's original will, the real one, filed with the state before Victor had his lawyers revise it. Turns out, when the primary beneficiary is found alive, trust provisions are automatically reinstated. He paused, letting that sink in. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I'm the majority shareholder of Vance Corp, which means I'm the new CEO. My hand flew to my mouth. Leo. And my first act, he continued, his voice soft now, was to appoint you as chairman of the board, because that company was your father's dream, and Victor stole it from both of us. But we're taking it back, together. I couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except cry. the good kind of crying, the kind that washes away poison. Leo stood up, sat on the edge of my hospital bed, and for the first time in 20 years, I held my son. Really held him. He was taller than me now, stronger, scarred by things I could only imagine. But he was mine. He was alive. And we had won. 3 days later, I stood in the boardroom of Vance Corp., the same room where Leo had destroyed Victor, where I'd seen that birthmark and remembered what love felt like. But this time, the room was full. Board members, executives, lawyers, all watching as Leo stood at the head of the table in a navy suit that made him look like the king he'd become. "Let's be clear about something," Leo said, his voice carrying that authority that made grown men sit straighter. My father, Victor Vance, tried to erase me, tried to erase my mother, tried to steal a legacy that belonged to our family. He failed. He pressed a button, and the screen behind him lit up with a photo. My father, Richard Vance, smiling in front of the original Vance Corp factory in 1965. This company was built on integrity, on innovation, on family, and under my leadership, it will be again. Anyone who participated in Victor's schemes has until 5 p.m. today to resign quietly. Everyone else, we have work to do. The room erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory applause, real applause. The kind that said, finally, someone who deserves to be here. After the meeting, Leo and I stood alone in that boardroom, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the San Jose skyline. "Your grandfather would be proud," I said quietly. Leo took my hand, the same hand that used to be so small in mine, and squeezed it. He left this for me because he knew I'd fight for it, but you know what he didn't know? He turned to look at me, and his eyes were wet. He didn't know how strong you are, that you'd survive 20 years of hell and still have the courage to fight back. That's not me, Mom. That's you. I shook my head. I didn't do anything. I was asleep. You woke up, he interrupted. When it mattered most, you woke up. You stopped taking the pills. You got the DNA test. You recorded his confessions. You think I could have done this without you. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. We destroyed him together. That's what Grandpa really left us. Not a company, not money. He left us each other, and Victor couldn't steal that, no matter how hard he tried. Victor's trial lasted 6 weeks and became the biggest spectacle San Jose had seen in decades. Court TV broadcasted every session. The New York Times ran a front-page story with the headline, "The Son Who Rose from the Grave to Destroy His Father." People magazine called it the ultimate revenge story. But I didn't watch any of it. Didn't read the articles or the think pieces or the hot takes on Twitter. I was too busy learning how to be myself again. The person I'd been before Victor drugged her into oblivion. Physical therapy for muscles that had atrophied from years of sitting still. Cognitive therapy for a brain that had been chemically suppressed for 2 decades. And regular therapy, the kind where you sit on a couch and talk about trauma until you can breathe through it instead of drowning in it. Leo was there through all of it. Not hovering, not smothering, but present. He'd show up at my new apartment. Victor's assets were frozen, and I'd moved into a penthouse Leo owned, with takeout food and stories about the company. About rebuilding what Victor had corrupted. About the employees who were relieved to finally work for someone with integrity. The day the verdict came in, Leo picked me up in his Tesla. Didn't ask if I wanted to go. Just said, "You should be there." For closure. So we sat in that courtroom, me in a simple black dress, Leo in his CEO armor, and watched the jury foreman stand up. On the count of kidnapping in the 1st degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of child endangerment, guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty. On the count of embezzlement, guilty. On 23 counts of administering controlled substances without consent. The list went on, and on. Guilty. 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 Each word was a nail in Victor's coffin, and I watched him shrink smaller with every count. When it was over, 45 years to life, no possibility of parole, Victor finally looked at me. Really looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. And you know what I did? I smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a triumphant smile. Just a smile that said, "I survived you." And that, apparently, broke him worse than the sentence. They had to help him stand to take him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us like locusts. Microphones in our faces, cameras flashing, everyone shouting questions at once. Mrs. Vance, how does it feel to see your husband convicted? Leo, what's next for Vance Corp? Will you write a book? Do a documentary. Leo handled it like he handled everything, with calm precision. He read a prepared statement about justice being served, about corporate reform, about moving forward. But when they asked me to speak, I surprised everyone, including myself. I stepped up to the microphone and said, 20 years ago, Victor Vance tried to bury his son to steal an inheritance. He kept me drugged and silent to hide his crimes. He thought he could erase us both. But here's what he didn't understand about family. Real family. Not the kind you manipulate and abuse. We're not that easy to kill. My voice got stronger with every word. My son survived hell. I survived something different but equally devastating. And we found each other again because love, real, unconditional, mother and son love, doesn't die just because someone buries it. It waits. It grows roots. And when it finally breaks through the surface, it's unstoppable. The reporters went insane. More questions, more flashing lights. But Leo just took my hand and led me to the car, leaving them all behind. We didn't go back to the office or to my apartment. Leo drove us to the cemetery, the same one where Victor had confessed, where the empty grave had been excavated and documented and finally exposed for the lie it was. But this time, we weren't there for evidence. We were there to say goodbye. To the lie. To the version of ourselves that Victor had tried to create. The headstone was gone now, removed by order of the court since there was no body to mark. Just an empty plot with fresh grass growing over the scar. Leo stood there for a long moment, his hands in his pockets, staring at the space where his name used to be carved in granite. "I used to have nightmares about this place," he said quietly. "About being trapped underground, screaming, and nobody hearing me. I'd wake up in foster homes thinking I was suffocating." I wanted to apologize again. I'd apologized 100 times already. For not knowing, for not fighting, for not finding him. But Leo shook his head before I could speak. "You don't owe me apologies, Mom. You were a victim too. Victor weaponized your grief against you. That's not your fault." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were clear, healed, or at least healing. "You know what the therapist I've been seeing told me? She said that survival isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about enduring, about holding on to who you are, even when someone's trying to erase you. You did that. You held on for 20 years. And the second you had a chance, the second you saw that birthmark, you woke up and you fought. That's not weakness, Mom. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." I started crying. Again. I seem to cry a lot these days, but the doctor said that was normal, that I was processing 2 decades of suppressed emotion, that tears were healthy. So I let them fall while my son, my impossible, miraculous son, pulled me into a hug. We stood there until the sun started setting, painting the cemetery in shades of orange and gold. And then we did something that felt important, necessary, final. We planted a tree, right there in the empty plot where Victor's lie had lived. A Japanese maple, Leo's favorite when he was little, though he was shocked I remembered. "This is better than a headstone," Leo said as we patted dirt around the roots. "Headstones are for endings, but trees are for new beginnings, for growth, for life that keeps going even after the fire." I touched one of the delicate leaves, and it felt like touching hope. "What do we do now?" I asked. Not because I didn't know. We had a company to run, a life to rebuild, 20 years of lost time to try to make up for. But because I wanted to hear him say it. Leo smiled, brushed dirt off his hands, and said, "Now, we live. We actually live, Mom. We build the company into something Grandpa would be proud of. We help other families who've been torn apart by people like Victor. We take all this pain and this rage and this survival, and we turn it into something good. Something that matters. and we do it together. So that's what we did. Vance Corp became more than a tech company. It became a mission. We established a foundation for missing children, funded investigations into unlicensed group homes, donated millions to organizations that help abuse survivors. Every board meeting, every decision, every innovation was driven by one question: would this make the world safer for families like ours? Would this prevent another Victor from destroying another Leo? And slowly, painfully, beautifully, we healed. Not all the way. I don't think you ever fully heal from something like that. But enough. Enough to laugh again. Enough to trust again. Enough to look at my son across a conference table and think, we won. Not just the trial, not just the company. We won something bigger. We got each other back. And that was worth every second of the 20-year war. 6 months after Victor's conviction, I stood in the newly renovated Vance Corp headquarters. No longer the cold, sterile monument to my husband's greed, but something warmer, something alive. Leo had redesigned everything. The top floor was now a childcare center for employees, kids, because he said no parent should ever have to choose between work and watching their children. The lobby displayed photos of our family, real photos, honest ones, including pictures of 5-year-old Leo that I'd hidden from Victor for years. And in the center of the boardroom, where Victor's portrait used to hang, was my father's, Richard Vance, the man who'd built this with integrity and left it to a grandson who'd proven worthy of the legacy. I was chair of the board now. Leo was CEO. And every single day, we made decisions that honored what family was supposed to mean. Leo and I had dinner together every Sunday, not in some fancy restaurant where people could gawk and whisper, but in my apartment or his, eating takeout and talking about everything we'd missed. 20 years of birthdays and holidays and milestones. I told him about the mother I'd been before the pills, before the grief, before Victor convinced me I was fragile. And he told me about the boy who'd survived foster care and homelessness and hunger, who'd turned pain into fuel and built himself into someone unstoppable. We didn't try to erase the lost years. We acknowledged them, mourned them, and then we focused on what we had now. Because Victor had stolen 20 years from us, but he didn't get to steal one more second. Not anymore. We'd taken our lives back, our company back, our family back. And God, it felt like breathing after being underwater for 2 decades. They say time heals all wounds. That's a lie. Time just teaches you how to carry the scars. But you know what does heal? Truth. Justice. Watching the person who tried to destroy you get exactly what they deserve while you stand there, alive and free and stronger than they ever imagined you could be. That heals. And so does this. Having my son look at me across a dinner table and say, "I love you, Mom," with eyes that actually see me. Not the drugged ghost Victor created. Not the broken widow I pretended to be. But me. Helena Vance. Survivor. Mother. Fighter. The woman who woke up from a 20-year nightmare and decided that she wasn't going to let the monster win. Victor's in prison now, and every day he wakes up in a 6x8 cell. I wake up in a home filled with light. That's justice. That's victory. That's what happens when you try to bury someone but forget that some things, love, truth, family, don't stay buried. They claw their way back up, and they bring hell with them. But here's the thing about revenge stories. They don't end with the villain in handcuffs. They end with you deciding what comes next, what you build from the ashes, what kind of person you become after you've survived the unsurvivable. And I'll tell you what I became: free, awake, whole again. Standing next to my son, who came back from the dead to save me, running the company my father built, helping families like ours, and living every single day like the gift it is. Victor wanted to erase us. Instead, we erased him, and we did it together, the way family should, the way it always should have been. You know, I waited 20 years to find my son and destroy the man who tried to kill him. 20 years of pills and fog and visiting an empty grave. That's a long time to plan revenge. That's a lifetime to hold on to hope. But the story I'm about to tell you, it happened in 72 hours. 3 days. That's all it took for one woman to go from humiliated bride to corporate assassin. Imagine this. Your fiancé leaves you at the altar, literally standing there in your white dress while 300 guests watch, and then starts a divorce countdown on Instagram. 3 days, 72 hours for you to publicly apologize for what? Existing, not being perfect enough. He wanted to humiliate you, to break you, to make you beg. But here's what he didn't know. She wasn't crying in that wedding dress. She was calculating, and by the time that countdown hit 0, she didn't just take his ring, she took his empire. Want to see what happens when you give a brilliant woman exactly 72 hours to plan your destruction? Click here, because trust me, you won't believe what she did with that timer.